to another episode. This is AI GTM Talks, episode 12. My name is Mani Iyer, here with our guest for today, Bala Vishnat. How are you?
Good. Awesome, Mani. Great to be on the show. Thank you for the invite.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So, Bala, what we will do is I'm quickly going to set some, background context for folks listening about what this series of talks is all about. And then we'll get right into it. And pretty much, the entire episode is going to be about you and what you have to share. So, folks, we kicked off the series of talks because we found that as AI has come in and it's transforming go-to-market at companies all the way from SMB, mid-market to enterprise, there's a lot of buyer confusion, if you will, with too many technologies, too many tools in different categories, different overlapping areas. So we're trying to clear up some of that confusion, hopefully, educate the buyer. We've had, in the series so far, if you look at who we brought on, it's been either AI GTM tech founders doing a deep dive into their category technology. And then we've had AI GTM revenue leaders who are talking about how they're using these tools in tech, within their company, how they're getting value. Now, today, it's a special episode for us because it's a different kind of a session today. We have with us Bala Vishnat. He's gotten a book that he's written recently, and we found the topic to be very interesting, very relevant to our audience. And it's all about, if I can frame it, Bala, it's pre-sales influence, and you have a whole framework around it. And with that, Bala, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to bring up the next slide just so you can introduce yourself, and we'll go from there.
Great.
So
Thank you.
here we go.
Thank you again. Thanks for the introduction and thanks for the invite, Mani. It's great to be on the show. So I just want to take a quick moment, give a 30-second background to myself, and then we'll get going with the slides. I come from the B2B environment. Founded and ran two companies, a CEO in the B2B space, and then being a CMO for the last 20 years. And so really all of those experiences translated into what I believe is important, and we'll discuss that in today's topic, which, as Mani said, is pre-sales influence. And so Mani, if you could go to the next slide, we'll talk about, I think, really what's going on is the whole B2B experience is changing, right? So it's a buyer's environment today. Buyers are in control, and buyers, in fact, and you will know this even from your own experience of how you evaluate and buy tools, is that it's no longer just about hearing a sales pitch and looking at a tool, right? By the time the salespeople get a call from vendors, majority of the buying decision has already happened. It's already been done, right? And really, what I found is that in all of my experience, there is not much focus on this pre-sales influence, which actually I think is very critical. And done right, the pre-sales influence can actually translate very well into the rest of the GTM, right? Post-sales, and where a lot of focus is. And so that's really what our focus is today, and we're going to talk about it. And as Mani said, there is a book that I've authored that I'll introduce, and we'll dig deeper. If you go to the next slide, Mani, I think the Mani, can you go to the next slide or?
Yeah. So one of the things, Bala, I think we're having with the technology we're using right now, putting up the slide is turning out to be a little bit of a challenge.
Oh, I see. Got it. Okay. Do you want me to share the slide?
I think I've been trying to share, switching over to that screen and sharing. But
I see.
You're welcome to try if you like. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me try, and if not, we can talk about it. It's fine, right?
Mm-hmm. So go for it.
Let me know if you can see the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Are you able to see the screen?
Not at the moment, but why don't you continue? Describe.
Oh, sure. Okay, let me talk about it. Okay, so
here it is. It did come up now. We're good. Yeah, please go on to the next one. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Okay, let me go to the next slide, see if it goes through. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So what you're seeing here is that really it's like an iceberg, right? Where the sales enablement is really the top 30% of what happens, but the pre-sales influence is really a large majority portion of it. and that
Mm-hmm.
happens before the sales engagement, which we briefly talked about, right? And
Yeah.
so the concept here is that doing a good job with this pre-sales influence can have transformative impact, right? It can help in redefining the buyer thinking. This is how buyers think of the problem itself. And I'll give a couple of instances that I have seen in my own experience working in companies, just as an illustration here. So, one example I want to talk about is the most recent company that I was a CMO at, which is CoreStack. It's broadly in the cloud governance space. Um, and if you type core stack Frost and Sullivan, you'll see that we our core stack was placed in the top right quadrant, in the leader quadrant, even as compared to like other very VMware and other popular companies. And really, this was about where, if you think about sustainability in cloud, it's a big topic. We pioneered it, and we came up and talked about it sufficiently enough that we piqued the interest of the analysts to have them cover it, and had AWS, of course, also came up with that. So it perfectly blended to where we kind of redefined the market in terms of how to think about the problem, right? So that's that. The
Mm-hmm.
advantage is also that if you do a good job, you're becoming a trusted authority in the minds of buyers. That it
Mm-hmm.
reinforces that. So that's a big positive benefit. The
Yep.
biggest benefits, in my opinion, are the last two, which is really where you reshape the buyer criteria. Because
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, when buyers use vendors to evaluate, they have a criteria. So you help in defining that criteria itself, right? In terms of how you affect from pre-sales influence. And the
Yep.
last part, which is important as they look at vendor tools, and as they look at the scorecard, the check marks that they want to place to pick a particular vendor, you help define that or restructure that buyer scorecard through which you are evaluated. So
Mm-hmm.
all of these four things really translate into, again, as I said, transformative outcomes in terms of bettering the sales cycle, accelerating it, improving the win rates, increasing the deal sizes. And the most powerful of all is where, if you do this pre-sales influence sufficiently well, you're able to show value. And that, as you know, is the best form in which you can discuss pricing. Because bringing up pricing by itself is not going to help. If you show value and price at 1/10 of the value you show, it's a no-brainer, whatever be the price, right? Whether it's $1 million or whatever it is. So it helps you advance that pricing power. So it really shows a lot of power from why pre-sale influence matters.
Got it. So yeah. So I think before we get into this, Bala, so this is the framework. I think I know you're going to talk about next. We should probably tell folks that we're not going to try to cover all of this, right? Because this is
Yes,
a lot of
it'll be a
material we
lot.
put
Yeah.
together in the book. Um, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So how do you? So the question is, assuming we all intuitively know it, right? We all intuitively know that we've got to seed the market with enough thoughts and show value. Um, it sort of help with that pre-sales influence. We intuitively know it. But the problem, even for myself, as I've thought through this over the last couple of decades, is even though we know that it has to be done, we all do it differently. We do some of it, we don't do all of it. We do it, but we may not do it in sequence. So really, what I've attempted to do here is put it in a framework, put it in a very systematic method, so that you're able to check the boxes in terms of what is applicable to you. All of
Mm-hmm.
it may not be applicable, and this really is the 8 by 5 by 5 framework, which means there are 200 elements that make it up. So it's a lot, right? So there's 25 in each of these 8 areas in terms of how do you decode behavior, how do you define the narratives, et cetera, as you can see in the slide, and we can make these slides available to you. Um, the goal is really systemizing us so that you know when to do what. And I do want to make a mention that even though this is a big framework and a lot of elements in it, a lot of it may not be applicable depending on the stage of your company, right? You could
Yeah.
be a startup, you could be a mid-sized organization, you could be an enterprise. So so you only have to do what is applicable to you, and that really talks to the next slide, which is the introduction to the book itself. And what is in the book is really the description, the theory behind these 8 part framework, right? The 8 by 5 by 5. But in addition to that, it also focuses on really figuring out your diagnosis, your gaps, right? Because it's important to diagnose before you prescribe on what you're going to do, and then mapping those gaps into capability gaps that or capabilities that you need to fix, and then figuring out which capabilities you want to address. Pick the top two or three and focus on that. That's one part of it, which is in the book. The second part of it is a quick start, right? What are the quick start items that can yield you best results from an outcome perspective? There are key takeaways, there are core insights. There is, again, as I mentioned, application for your size, right? Depending on where you are in the journey, whether you're a startup, founding new startup, small size org, mid market, enterprise, etc. So it really has those buckets in terms of what's relevant for you. Not all of it is relevant. And the topic for today is really AI. This book talks about how AI is elevating all of these components. Of course, we're not going to be able to talk about all of it. We'll pick the top three, as Mani said, but that's really there as well. And we'll talk more about the book as well, in terms of where to go. But I want to focus on the more relevant part for today's conversation, which is really how AI is helping in go to market across all of these areas. Um,
So, so Bala, do you mind if we go back to that slide with the
sure.
eight step framework? Because I think this is what we should probably spend just a minute on, right? So folks watching, listening can understand where we're going to be diving deeper. Because, and I think you and I discussed this, Bala, right? Prior to this session, we said one of the first things a company, and by the way, we have folks all the way from founders, right? As you said, mid-market and larger enterprise
Sure. Yeah.
folks listening. um, Positioning and messaging is so critical, right? So that's knowing what you are trying to put out into the market, what your offering is. I know we're going to talk about that as one of the three that we picked for today. Second was going to be brand and authority, which is I'm sure some of us probably want to perhaps see more reinforcement of brand and why brand is important, right? Regardless of stage of company. So, I'm sure you have some interesting thoughts to share there.
Yeah.
And the
Yes.
third, Bala, I think we picked up on, and we're going to dive deeper, was journey and intelligence, which is buyer behavior, buyer journey, how to decode it, how to understand it, and just so people know, I think one of the things we want to give some assurance was it's not just going to be slide where we're going to have a conversation. We're also going to be showing a little bit of actual demo, if you will,
Yes.
right, towards the end of
Yes.
the presentation. So I wanted to set the stage as we get deeper. Um, so so where did you want to take the conversation from here, Bala?
Yeah,
So I know you have a
perhaps,
lot to
Mani,
cover.
what I could spend a minute on is also
Yeah.
talk about, for example, bow tie, right, which is a very popular sort of a framework that exists. I wanted to take probably a 30 seconds to kind of talk about where each fits, if that's okay with you.
No, no, we should. In fact, that was going to be one of my other questions because let's take a step back from the book you wrote. Let's help us understand. You felt deeply. You felt you had to write this book. We get that. Um, Today, if you just take a step back for marketers, how do marketers learn marketing? you
Yeah,
know, where did they pick up? I mean, there's so much here. I mean,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
complex. So how do you think people are learning their marketing and getting grounded in their marketing skills these days?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest learnings, and of course, folks are going to resonate with us, is that doing marketing for marketing's sake is not going to work, right? What I mean by that is doing marketing in isolation is a sure shot at failure, because at best it's going to be very short term. You
Hmm.
have to blend in marketing as an integrated function of the GTM. And when I say GTM, it's not just marketing. Of course, we think of it as marketing and sales, but it's even beyond that, right? Product is a big part of GTM,
Hmm.
because there's even PLG motions, which becomes a GTM in itself. But product is an
Right.
important part. And then there's marketing, and then there's sales, and then there's customer success, and there's
Right.
also leadership. So
Mhm.
all of these are very tightly involved. So when you think of this, it goes even beyond this. It's not just about how you view your own organization in terms of these functions. It's really working it backwards from the buyer that you want to target. So, which is why journey and intelligence is the first bucket. It's a foundational bucket here, because the first thing, as I say, is decoding buyer behavior is absolutely key. You got to start with that and then work it backwards. And
Mhm.
just for a moment, if you think about decoding buyer behavior, you understand the buyer, you understand sort of the problems that they solve, not worry about your solution. And then you help define narratives that fixes those buyer behavior, you are halfway there in terms of how you need to progress. And the rest of it is building credibility, which is establishing your brand, delivering insights. Unfortunately, delivering insights, which I call as content, right, is where a lot of marketers focus on. They believe that the big thing that they need to do today in sort of the digital world is really put out a lot of content, right? They start with that. But if you haven't done sort of understanding buyer behavior and defining your narratives, content is going to fail, right? Because what would you position your message against and who would you appeal to? So delivering insights is important because that's the way you put it out there. But it's going to fail, right? But if you do a good job with that, then you're able to convert the awareness. And here again, as a marketer, I've seen this as a problem, Mani, is that when I go into board meetings, the discussion is all about leads, right? How many leads have you generated? Now, that is important, and that is obviously what's going to convert. But the big part is unless you focus on demand generation, which is doing the first four, lead generation is for lead generation's sake. And chances for it to convert predictably at a good CAC or a good cost of acquisition, good CAC to LTV ratio, all of those are not going to work well. So converting awareness into proper leads becomes next, right? And then the last three is really how do you multiply the influence through partners and ecosystem? How do you use community to activate the voice? And how do you unify the strategy? So this I felt this sort of a sequential method I felt was a good way to learn marketing and really execute marketing with value first approach and an educational based approach that
Hmm.
sits well in today's marketplace where buyers have all the choice and they have all the mediums to go to. They have infinite content that they get fed with, and this is a proper way is what I felt.
Understood. So, okay. So I keep coming back to this, and I hope you don't mind, right? Which is clearly you felt that there is a need in, call it the marketplace of, educating fellow marketers um, on how to do marketing in today's day and age, right? With AI
Yeah,
also coming into the mix. So that's, I don't want to, I hope I'm paraphrasing it correctly in terms of maybe perhaps a motivation for this. Um, how would you contrast this pre-sales influence framework that you have developed or you put together here from anything else you've seen out there in terms of, you know, similar kinds of frameworks, any which ways that marketers are being taught, if you will, to do marketing in B2B today?
sure.
Um, and I know you mentioned the bow tie, and I know that's something by the folks from Winning by Design. I think it's important. Let's frame that for folks listening, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
What is out there? What are the frameworks available? The other, I do want to bring this up. The other thing people also sometimes get confused about is you've got some specific sales methodologies. You probably have heard of MEDDIC and MEDPIC and all of those, right? And now you have this, however marketers are doing marketing, you've got the framework you put together for pre-sales influence. Uh, People know about revenue architecture and, by winning by design and the bow tie model. Are others top level folks should be aware of that? And how do you see all of these playing together?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, I want to show on page 15 of the book here. I talk about is exactly this topic, right? How this framework, the first 70 is what I call it, differs from the other go to market models, right? So you talked about bow tie and such, but I want to generalize it even more. There is traditional models, right? There is the IDA framework, which is attention and interest, desire, action type of a framework to talk about how you want to take something to that's more on the messaging front, but how do you take that? There is
Okay.
traditional ABM type of methodologies, which I talk about in the book. There is sales enablement methods, and then there is customer journey mapping type frameworks that exist, and then a whole suite of digital marketing systems that exist, right? And then there are more specific nuances like the bow tie winning by design that you talked about. So let me just broadly take at a very high level and talk about perhaps I would say three or four areas where there is points of differences, right? So the primary focus itself, right, is where this talks about the pre-sales influence. And
Hmm.
Bowtie, for example, is great. It's a good model. It's a needle model. It talks about more customer progression metrics, right? Think of volume, conversion, time, etc.
Yes.
So the focus is somewhat different. Both are needed, I think, I feel like the pre-sales influence can influence a lot of what happens, and can influence in a positive way in terms of how the rest of the things progress and how you can measure it. So Bowtie is more a measurement thing, right? So if you think of revenue growth, um, the 8-step systematic framework is different from sort of the funnel optimization for recurring impact, which I observed in the Bowtie framework, right? So the revenue growth, sort of the focus is different.
Got
And
it.
then I would say sort of the competitive advantage, right? The competitive advantage in this model comes from changing buyer thinking. And again, as I mentioned in the first slide, changing buyer thinking, redefining criteria, restructuring sort of the scorecard, that sort of a system, versus Bowtie is more on operational excellence. That's
Okay.
needed, but it's probably later down the line, right? So that's the difference. Now, in terms of alignment, there is also a difference, right? I think this talks about where you unify all of these functions, the GTM functions, which we talked about,
Hmm.
whereas the Bowtie talks about unifying common data elements or a common data language to use, right?
Got
Which I
it.
think comes later on and it's important.
Hmm.
And the last part that I want to talk about is sort of the journey itself, the buyer journey. Now,
Hmm.
I am a big believer, and I think folks on the call will hopefully agree that today's buyer journey is very complex. It's not linear at all, right?
Yeah.
And that's why attribution is so difficult, and it's not a common thing. So this focuses on sort of a complex pathway to a buyer journey,
Hmm.
whereas Bowtie talks about sort of linear progression from acquisition to sort of retention and expansion, which is good. After some stage, it sort of can get linear, and so it focuses on that element, right? So that's more sort of a nuanced difference with respect to one particular framework here.
Okay, now I'm going to now drill down on this.
Yeah.
Let's take the typical mid-market company, even as we go into the larger enterprise. Um, can we break down by role, by function, who might be kind of call it the executors, implementers of one model versus the other? Like, how do you, for example, I've seen, for example, right? I mean, I'm a member of, if I can give them a shout out, Pavilion, 5,500 plus marketers, sales leaders, they're all part of that community. When I go there, a lot of the talk is certainly around winning by design and bow tie, and of course, in the revenue architecture programs and so forth, I've seen a lot of the folks come more from, as you said, more from a data, revenue operation, sales ops, marketing ops, those types of backgrounds, and perhaps some folks in other like demand and growth leaders and so forth. Um, can you talk about that? Like the
Yeah, absolutely.
people who are more
So
likely to be folks who would be operating with this as the primary driver for their role or function within the organization versus folks that might be operating with that one?
yeah, no, absolutely. So I'll probably give it from a perspective of one of the things that we implemented in the last company I was with, which is CoreStack, as I mentioned, right? So I
Right.
think the biggest thing is today's buying journey, in addition to sort of these nuances that we talked about, also happens, especially in B2B, right? Also happens in two stages, right? Which is focusing on sort of the executives that you talked about, and then focusing on sort of the practitioners.
Hmm.
With executives, what you do from a go-to-market perspective is you think of it from a because think of a company that is looking at a solution, right? Practitioners can be appealed to, and can be brought into the picture, and you can measure how they're progressing, sort of do those type of techniques. But if you haven't adopted a parallel approach of working with the executives, and when I say working with the executives, these are more sort of thought leadership content and things that change their thinking. And I want to use one instance of how we did this at CoreStack, right? So at CoreStack, it's broadly sort of in the cloud management space at the highest category, but we wanted to elevate it because we were AI powered, and we could do a lot of prediction, which is one of the things we'll talk about as well in terms of where AI is helping in the GTM world. So because we could do AI powered cloud management, we wanted to elevate it and call it cloud governance,
Hmm.
sort of as a proactive cloud management. But then cloud management, if you think about it, typically as a solution, it's talked about. It's probably thought about as a cost thing, right? How do you save costs when you're using the cloud?
Hmm.
Saving cost is okay, but it's not as sexy in a board meeting, right? It's not as powerful. What's powerful in a board meeting is sort of how do you elevate the business? How do you get more business into the fold? And how do you think of it from that perspective? That's what elevates it, right? So we authored a white paper which talked about why cloud governance belongs in the boardroom, and really, it was a thought leadership piece which appealed very well to executives because that's what they care about, right? And then you do thought leadership. Today, LinkedIn makes it available to do thought leadership ads, for example, right? And speaking on stage when you go for events is a discipline that we formed. Is we never attended an event for attendance sake. We always attended events with speaking on stage, where we can naturally establish some authority and thought leadership in the process, right? So if you approach it from that perspective and work with the executives and then do the rest of the things which are common from a go to market perspective in terms of appealing to the practitioners, right, which has been well talked about, which you do, what really happens is the practitioners then go up and bring up these things that they talk about or hear about in their internal team meetings or Slack or team meetings, etc. But when executives hear it, they were already seen sort of the value prop from a business perspective, from a again, as I mentioned, from a boardroom perspective. And so there is synergy that happens when between the executives and practitioners, and that's what we've observed as sort of the real way to crack the go-to-market in terms of acquiring properly. And if you've done a good job in showing value and such, the conversion mechanism, everything becomes easier, and the rest of the models that we talk about can measure it appropriately and it can optimize and go from there. So that's one example of where I felt there is a lack of focus, and unfortunately, as I mentioned, 70% is influenced by that. So it's a very important area to focus that is not being looked at today.
No, so I wanted to again go back to the question I posed, which was I've seen some of these models, the bow tie being one, focusing, as you said, on the data measurement ops perspective. Do you see this pre-sales influence framework then primarily driving uh, thought leadership content, other kinds of content and offerings? Is this more for consumption by the content marketing, product marketing? Who do you see as the primary folks who will benefit from this framework solution offering?
Yeah,
Primary
I mean the
versus
early stages of what this is, right? So let's talk about all this, right? So first is journey and intelligence, an area that you focus on, money that we'll talk about, is
right.
really appealing to the folks that want to uh, elevate you're understanding the buyer behavior and providing that so that you have these early touch points you're providing to a company to capitalize on, right? So that becomes important, and depending on
Correct. Sorry, just to add to what you said, I mean, we certainly see journey and intelligence being, from what we've experienced, is close to the hearts of folks like in the growth function and demand function, for
correct,
instance. They're always
correct.
trying to understand who are the buyers coming in. They're trying to drive a quality audience or traffic to their site. They're trying to make sense of it, create those outbound, right? Cohorts,
Yes.
if you will, of people they can reach out to for outbound and so forth. But yeah, go ahead.
Yes. So journey and intelligence feeds into growth and demand perfectly, as you said, right? The
Right.
positioning and messaging and brand and authority and content leadership. I feel a lot of content is being put out here for practitioners today, right? So that needs to continue, but that needs to be baked in with sort of a proper narrative and understanding by the buyer behavior, right? So that's important. That probably is missing, and that is probably for the practitioners to consume content because executives, again, from a thought leadership piece, may be consuming content, but most of the content is being consumed by practitioners of the world, right?
Yeah.
So there is
So
different pieces of this appeals differently to different audiences, right? In terms of where you focus. Journey and intelligence, growth and demand are clubbed together. Positioning and messaging, brand and content authority. Brand again can be an executive focus. As I mentioned, when we elevated it, we saw distinct change. We appealed to analysts that we otherwise couldn't have appealed to. So it's really a combination, I think, right? In B2B, you need to appeal to the executives and you need to appeal to the practitioners, and there are pieces here that appeal in both of those aspects.
I'm going to speak on behalf of a lot of, I'll talk about founders out there, right? SaaS and AI founders, CEOs, hopefully who are listening in. I know for a fact this is a big struggle for many of them, which is how do I figure out my positioning? I have something to offer. How do I figure out where I stand on the brand scale, right? How strong is my brand and what is the lack of, say, strength of my brand, how is that impacting my business? So I'm going to pose a couple of these questions. Because let's if you can, right? We're about 30 minutes and we have about another 15 minutes. So maybe if we can spend the next few minutes, just if you can address those two concerns, questions that
Absolutely.
founders have,
Yeah,
is how do they crack the code on their positioning and messaging? I know Chris Lockhead, if you've probably heard of him, he's a big believer in category. He talks about category and creating categories,
absolutely.
or
Yeah.
leading. So this is hopefully an area that will educate all of us. So please.
Absolutely, yeah. So let me take a minute. So when you think of brand, it is one of these fuzzy topics, right? That again, we all intuitively think we need to know it and do it, but it's hard to measure, and so it often becomes this play where it's difficult to justify budgets for, and it's sort of these ether where you're doing stuff that you don't know the returns for. So let me probably give 3 or 4 instances that I think is a different way to approach and think of brand, which can provide value. So the first thing that I would say is, and this is, let me call it as attention competition, right? So what I mean by that is that you have to think of it as against what is traditionally done is in terms of mass marketing and doing those type of things. You have to take the approach of, and we talk about in the book, think about it from a neuroscience based pattern breaking moments, right? You have to embed, and there is a principle that we talk about in the book as well that's well backed in research, is if you adopt neuroscience based pattern breaking moments, you'll be able to become more memorable. You'll be able to stick with it, that you can measure across in terms of brand recall and other things, that is more functional from a perspective of how you do, right? So think of neuroscience based pattern breaking moments that you can embed in your marketing when you think of brand, and not just do mass marketing. The second I would say is, I would call it as trust deficit, right? What I mean by that is that we talked about it briefly, is that you have to elevate whatever it is that you're solving by first understanding the problem and defining narratives for it, but really position it more that appeals to the executives and appeals to sort of the business, rather than to the practitioners only. Now, of course, practitioners benefit from it and they're going to evaluate you for it, but you have to figure out a way to elevate that message. And I gave you one instance of how we did it at CoreStack.
Mhm.
Doing that from a thought leadership and becoming a trusted advisor, rather than sort of other types of messaging which are feature based. So if you think of it as transformation, not as that, is going to elevate the chances of becoming a trust advisor, which is going to again stick in people's mind. The whole concept of brand value, I think, is in brand recall, is in becoming memorable, is in people thinking about you when they think about the solution after they understand the problem. So these two help with that, right? The third I would say is in revenue attribution. Now, what I mean by that is, rather than sort of disconnected approach, make it a point, right? And you will understand, Mani, that today, for example, if you go on LinkedIn and do something, right, have a podcast, for example, this is the podcast that I'm doing with you, and if there is somebody that's going to learn about First 70, um, but really they learned it from here on the podcast, but then after this podcast they don't know where to go. They just do a Google search and type First 70, and they'll come to the website and go with it, and probably even fill up a form, do whatever. Unfortunately, the digital attribution for that, assuming it converts to revenue, or even otherwise, it's whatever attribution you want to tap to, is going to show it as Google, right? But in
Yeah.
reality, it's not a direct search. It's coming from this podcast. How would you know it? That's a big missing piece. No
Right.
digital attribution can track it because it's not there. So one of the techniques that I have employed, as well as I tell everybody that I go to, is make sure that you have it as a process, that anybody that speaks with a customer, whether it's an SDR or a sales or whoever, ask the question, hey, how did you learn about it, right? Or how did you first learn about it? You're going to
Hmm.
get nuggets. It's not a drop down, right? You're going to hear all kinds of things. Some are going to say, look, I heard about it on the podcast. Others are going to say, the podcast was shared on LinkedIn and I happened to learn about it there. Whatever it is, capture it, because that is golden that you're not going to get anywhere. So, and then you will be able to attribute it to brand, right? You'll be able to attribute it to investments you've done that's going to fetch results over time when you do pattern matching. So that revenue attribution, I think, is a missing piece, because that is really what is going to help you show value for the brand efforts that you put in. The two more quickly that I'll mention is, what comes to my mind is organizational alignment, right? Is brand cannot be in isolation. It has to be cross-functional. We talked about GTM, how it's not just a marketing or a sales function, it's really there. Everybody needs to speak the same language. You need to convey the same thing, right? That's going to have an impact in terms of how you elevate your brand as a whole. And maybe the last one I'll talk about is market positioning, right? And you briefly talked about it, Mani. The generic category, the generic feature comparisons, having this table of putting yourself at the first and putting all of the features and putting a check mark is not going to work, because the competition is going to do just the reverse. They're going to put themselves first, their own features, and they're going to put a check mark against all of them and leave you in the dark. So the best way to do this is to kind of define your own category and do thought leadership in that, because that becomes memorable. People know you for that. You become the de facto standard. Drift, as an example, defining conversational marketing is one, or inbound marketing by HubSpot. These are category defining moments that stick in people's head, which provides brand value. So those are some of the things that comes to my mind just on the top.
Sounds good. And so I think now you really help clarify for folks like, people kicking off companies and so forth, how to think about positioning, messaging, brand. So that's great. Um, so now you wanted to, I think we have about 10 minutes. So we can do
Yeah, let
two
me
things.
let me take maybe 3 minutes, and then I also want to talk about a demo itself that we can quickly show. So I'll just
Sure.
take 3 minutes. Just talk about AI, right? All of what we
Yep.
talked about is doable without AI, but the
Right.
advantage with AI today are these things, right? It really helps you uh, change the perspective from reactive to predictive because of what AI can power. The second is from generic to hyper personalized, which is very
Yes.
relevant today to make sure that if you do a good journey in intelligence, find out who exactly is engaging, who exactly, what signals you're getting, to hyper personalize becomes important, and AI can help you with that. Linear to dynamic buyer journeys. We talked about how it's no longer linear, how it's complex. AI can help with that. And then really data driven rather than gut instinct based things can be powered by AI. There is three things here, Mani. We won't have time to go through all of this, but what I've done here is captured from a brand and authority. We talked about a lot. Which areas can AI really impact in a beneficial, big way, right? There is monitoring brand, identifying leadership opportunities, measuring brand impact on revenue, predicting which approaches will build your authority, and then advocating brand or identifying brand advocates seamlessly are all things that AI can specifically help with in terms of brand. Um,
Yep.
the next thing I want to talk about is positioning and messaging. Again, defining narratives. Once you've identified your journey in intelligence, there's probably 5 areas that AI has a distinct power to shape GTM. This is
Okay.
addressing this challenge of generic messaging failing, where you can sort of customize the messaging in a very good way at scale, right? So that can be done with AI. Limited
Hmm.
competitive intelligence on how, on position effectiveness can be enhanced or can be addressed sufficiently with AI. Personalizing value, struggling to localize messaging. Localization, I think, is very important, especially as companies go global. How do you
Yep.
do it at scale? And it's not just about changing the words, which can be done more easily, right? It's about metaphors that you use. There's cultural adaptations. There is a whole
Yep.
big topic in the book that talks about how do you culturally adapt what you do in different geographies, because buying method and the value and everything changes. And so how do you localize at scale? And then
Yep.
adapting messages in real time, right? That becomes key. Is based on the behavior of somebody coming to your site. How do you deliver content that is more personalized to them? And there are tools available. There's tools available for every one of this, actually, but really this the goal with this is just to showcase which areas AI can really impact.
Yep.
The last topic which we wanted to talk about is journey and intelligence. Really, there is a few areas here. There's predictive account identification, buying committee, which becomes a big deal. This is more a B2B specific thing, where today we know there is 6 to 10 people or 6 to 10 folks that are involved with any kind of buying, right? How do you map this, right? And again, each one of this is different areas. The hierarchy is different, the levels are different, the way you message is different. So how do you map it first to understand it and then personalize the message to each? This can be done with AI. Signal consolidation and interpretation, as well as the last two, which, Money, I want to bring it back to you, is person level website identification and offsite intent signals. I want to turn it over to you because I found Kwanzu to be one of the best tools available there. I've seen it personally as well over time, and this is greatly valuable today more than any time else. So I want to hand it off to you. But before I do that, I just want to say that So well, let's come back to that. But I want to get your thoughts on the last two, especially more so from a potentially a quick demo perspective.
Yeah, absolutely, Bala. But before we get to a demo, I think since we are more trying to explain to people, right, broadly what's happening. So let me
Yeah.
tell you in the journey in intelligence as a category, what we see happening. That could be interesting
Sure.
to people
Yeah.
also. One is that there are some newer tools that have been emerging that are really focusing on that the item in the middle that you've got, which is signal consolidation, right? Because the whole idea of buying signals, that you have buying signals on your website, buying signals off your website, buying signals in a social, right, a social channel, be it LinkedIn, be it any of these others, could be in communities, could be there are buying signals also in your own CRM, in your internal recorded conversations, in phone calls and meetings and what have you. So the ability to discern and pull out signals and start to organize these signals and tie the signals to whatever is your ideal customer profile, ICP, if you will, for your product or your solution, and then being able to segment it and organize it across multiple products, multiple solutions. There's just a lot of innovation going on, as you know,
Yeah.
Bala, right, in that
Yeah.
whole area. The second thing we see as a continued struggle for companies is I have all these signals. How do I prioritize my actions? How do I make sure the right signals are being put together to pick the right company to go after, the right prospect at that company, as you said, and the follow on to that is what's the right message to that prospect at that
Yeah.
company.
Yeah.
Um, and so that signal consolidation, unifying these signals, operationalizing these signals. So we've certainly at Quanzu, right, we've focused on signal based outbound. We specifically focus on the outbound motion, meaning through emails that are sent out by SDRs and account execs and sales teams, through even LinkedIn sequences of messages that are sent out to LinkedIn, through have properly formulated voice scripts. And so we
Hmm.
only do the voice script piece, by the way. We leave the actual delivery of the email, delivery of the LinkedIn message to other tools. So we have effectively a signals hub, and then from the signals hub, the ability to aggregate the signals and then also tap into additional signals. So the other
Hmm.
point I do want to make is no one platform technology tool has all the signals. It just doesn't.
Okay.
So, what customers need to understand is that you have to put even multiple tools together to increase your resolution rate, increase your match rates. Perfect example, you've called out personal level website visitor identification. We've been in the market with that for over 2 years.
Mm.
We have one of the
Yeah.
more mature products in that category. But we're not the only game in town. So, what we, in fact, we're very pretty candid about it. We tell everybody. In fact, there are other folks talk about it too. Put multiple tools together. You're anyway paying for the lead or the signal. Most of us don't charge for the platform. We don't charge for the user fee, none of that stuff. So it's a net positive for you to string together multiple tools, get net new warm leads off of multiple tools, and then feed it into your outbound motion. I hope that makes sense. Um,
No, absolutely. Yeah. And,
yeah, offsite.
like,
Go ahead.
no, in that regards, I want to make a mention, right? I mean, B2B, we all think of spending on events. But you think of an event, it's a large investment that you make often, right? And
Right.
it's one of these fuzzy things, right? Is how do you measure impact and those type of things that happen. So what I'm a big proponent of is doing both. Events are needed, especially if you can speak on stage, as I mentioned, but
Yeah.
invest some of that into these multiple tools, as you said, which can really help and really help pay for ultimate cost of acquisition in a very positive way.
Yeah, very much. You got to do a blended thing. In fact, we actually plug into a lot of the event spend that people are doing, where you pre-event, post-event, driving people to certain pages, de-anonymizing traffic on those pages, turning them into what we call it website warm leads that people can go and action on and on. And then offsite intent, which is off of the website, topic-based signals that you can bring back, and then you can unlock these warm leads off of the site. In the
Yeah,
interest of time, Bala, I think maybe we'll have to skip the demo portion today.
sure.
But more than happy to talk to folks offline about it. But really, we wanted to have the focus of this talk be really about you, your talk. I mean, your book. So let's bring it back to that for folks. So first 70, which is the pre-sales influence framework. You have a book that's coming out on Amazon. When is it going to be out?
It is out. It is live right now. I wanted to time it for your particular event, so it's live right now, and
Cool.
it's actually priced as low as Amazon would nearly allow, at least for the paperback. The
Mm,
so the paperback is it's priced at $9.99, which is about the
mm,
low price that Amazon would allow, and
mm,
so that's really there. And so if you want to take advantage of that, you could just go to first70.com, and it'll take you directly to the Amazon link, and you could get it. The hardbound is a little nicer, of course, but Amazon won't let me price it as low, so
yeah.
so it's there. But the content is the same, and it's really, I would say, it's really the last 20 years of my learning experience, being CEOs at two companies and CMOs at many companies, speaking with people like you, Mani, and a whole bunch of more CMOs, and so it's really a good capture, and I think it's of good value. I think you should really see, talking about value to price, I think it'll be many folds over the $10 that it's priced at, which is the lowest
Yeah,
that Amazon will.
I have no doubt, Bala. So let me do this. Let's just put up the contact information for you and I, and then folks can reach out to us.
Yeah, really. My I didn't have so my LinkedIn is just Bala Vishnat, and I didn't have that. But if you scan this, you will go to the Amazon page, which again has an about author, which is there. So feel free to connect me on LinkedIn. We can have a chat. We can go through this. I've looked at Mani's Kwanzaa before as well, so we can talk about that also. There you go. So you can email me, you can LinkedIn to me, and we can have a conversation. I can help you in any way that I can with this.
Thank you, Bala. Awesome session. And folks, that wraps episode 12 of our AI GTM Talks, and hope you